Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. So let's begin with, as usual, our morning meditation for 5 minutes. So we'll set a positive motivation and then calm your mind. And I won't lead you, so you can lead yourself through this. Be sure that you check your posture before you start, and that you make sure that your motivation for participating includes not only yourself, but as many beings as possible. So let's get started doing some review from yesterday. So I'm not going to go through the whole 12 links that Venerable Lexo talked about, but I do want to talk about, just remind you of some of the key points. So the outside circle, when we were looking at that wheel of life, the outside circle was all the links, what they call dependent origination, which is the key that shows how we stay stuck in cyclic existence, in samsara, over and over and over again. And he talked about sort of two aspects, the two causation parts. The first causation part being at the very beginning with the ignorance and the compositional, I think he called them composite actions, the karma, and then consciousness. So those three are like the first links that cause us, that plant the seeds for us to be reborn again and again. And then he talked about the links that cause those seeds that have been planted to ripen. So those are related to the craving and the grasping. After we have the contact and feeling, but then we get this craving and grasping, and those become the conditions that make those seeds that have been planted in the first part ripen into another existence. Okay, so if we want to interrupt this cycle, we can do it at either one of those places. Okay, the ignorance, of course, like we've talked about in the past, this misperception of reality, this misperception of things as existing independently from their causes and conditions, independently from their parts, and independently from our mind labeling them. That this misperception that things exist in that way, when we start to develop that that awareness, that knowledge, that wisdom that is opposite to that ignorance, then we can start to stop that beginning cause. Okay, so stopping planting that seed originally. And then we can also use this wisdom of emptiness and selflessness to stop the craving and the grasping, which is more of what I was emphasizing when I was talking about the how our ignorance creates our attachment and anger. So that whole link of those links of how when we see particularly ourselves as independent of all these external conditions, and then we have a good feeling as a result of contacting them, but we still think that they're separate, then we develop these afflictive emotions like attachment and anger that wants to do something to the external world in order for us to get back to balance, to get free from those difficult emotions. And so starting to see that the self doesn't exist in the way that we believe it does, as somehow separate, can help us to not be subject to developing that attachment and that anger and doing the harmful actions that are going to create the suffering for us to experience in the future. And also, when we talk about the 12 links, they stop us from encouraging those seeds that cause us to be born again and again in samsara. So developing things like a sense of the interdependence of the self, the lack of its independent existence, starts to allow us to be more content and more, have more gratitude, and be less, expecting things from others and expecting, external conditions to make us happy. And the more that we can develop that contentment, the less likely then we're going to encourage any seeds that we have developed along the way from ripening at the time of death. We die with a happy mind, we die with a peaceful mind, we die with a mind of no regrets. And then it's easier to be free of this cycle that we're so now we're so stuck in, because we, are constantly grasping, and either we're grasping at something to, to make us happy, or we feel like those external conditions are making us unhappy, so we have to push them away. Okay. So a big key to this then is developing this view of selflessness. Okay. Now, this is difficult because we do have a self. Okay. And the Buddha never said there is no self. So the difficulty is, okay, well, I still have to relate to the world, and I am me and these are others. And in order for me to relate to the world, I can't mix them all up, right? I can't not have boundaries where me ends, and somebody else starts. So when we start to look at this interdependence of the self, and we widen our view of the self more and more, and we start to see, well, I couldn't exist without, my parents. I couldn't exist without all the people who, fed me and grew all the food and, protected me by building shelters. And, as we start to widen that sense of self, we have to start to balance these two views, okay, of a self as existent, and at the same time as not existent in the way that we believe it to, as independent, as separate from everybody else. But unfortunately, for as long as we've had a mind, we've had ignorance. So lifetime after lifetime, we've had this view of the self, of putting these two things together, that a self exists, and that in order for a self to exist, it has to exist as independently. And this is our problem. Okay. We have to somehow now have a self that exists and yet exists interdependently. And so starting to get that view of, yes, there's a me here, but this me is not so absolutely, separate. And so then, okay, so all right. So that view of the self that we believe exists separately and independently, that's the selflessness that we're talking about when we start doing a meditation that tries to get rid of that. Okay, to get rid of that self that we have exaggerated its existence. So that's why we do the meditation on the 4-point analysis. So let's review that. Okay, so the 4-point analysis is an analytic meditation. So just like any other meditation, we start with a sense of, calmness and focus. We get the mind more flexible, able to work with, a topic that we have that's fairly hidden, fairly subtle. Very, we're not really used to looking for the difference between these two selves. So the object of negation, what that object of negation means, it's like, what is the kind of self that we're trying to get rid of? Okay, that's the object of negation. It's the self that has been exaggerated, the self that sees itself as independent, as separate. Okay, so the way in which we do that is that we create a triggering situation. So like we imagine a time when we were blamed for something that we didn't do, okay? Or when someone criticized us, or someone betrayed us, or we accomplished something really amazing, okay? And so then we imagine that situation, and then we examine with our minds, what is my experience of a self at that time? Okay. And usually it appears to exist as somehow separate from just a body and mind, as more, like I said, independent, more concrete, as somehow having more reality than just this body and mind. And this is our object of negation, not the self that I need to function, you know, like the self that is aware that I am showering, or aware that I am reading, or aware that I am listening. It's when emotions are involved, when we feel like that self has been attacked in some way. And then we agree on the reasoning in the sense that, okay, if that self exists, then I should be able to find it somewhere. Okay. If it doesn't exist, then when I start looking for that experience to see if it is something beyond that body and mind, then I should be able to find it. Okay. It's a very powerful experience. It's, you know, and especially when we're doing this object of negation exercise, it's very emotionally involved. So it feels like at the moment that it really exists. But when we start looking more carefully in the body, in the mind, what we find is that it doesn't really exist, that it's something that our minds have made up. Okay, that our minds have taken a body and mind and labeled it, and then given the label more reality than it actually has. It's given it more independence, it's given it more concreteness, it's given it more substance. That's when we talk about it as having a substance, that somehow this self can exist separately from this body and mind. So looking for it, trying to find it, okay? Looking for it in the body, looking for it in the mind. And this is the meditation that we have to do over and over and over to start to experience the unfindability of that particular experience. But it's difficult because we get that experience, right? When we think about, you know, someone betraying us or someone rejecting us. And then as soon as we start looking for it, the experience goes away. Right? So we have to again and again bring it up. Remember where we had that feeling of that self existing in that way. Okay. All right. So now we have to balance. Let me see what's next. So functioning in the world, let's talk about that a little bit. In order to function in the world, we have to have a self. And when we start talking about bodhicitta, then, you know, all the text starts saying, oh, you have to give up yourself. You know, it's about others. So we cherish others, and self, you know, selfishness is the worst. Okay. So here we go again, right? Talking about a self. What, you know, how do we balance all of this? Because here now we're saying other people have selves, right? And they all deserve this, but then I don't deserve it. I don't have a self. No, I have a self, right? I have what we call a conventionally existent self. So if you're familiar with the conventional truth and the ultimate truth, I have a conventionally existent self, okay? Have to have it in order to function. It has to be even taken care of, right? It has to be nurtured in some way in order to be able to serve others, in order to be able to benefit others. But at the same time, I can't have a sense of self that is somehow overblown, that is somehow more than everybody else's, for one thing, right? That self-importance, that we call that pride, this idea that myself is more important than everybody else's self, or is better than everybody else's self. Okay, we can't have that, right? Because that, I mean, that's not just not true, right? And if you have that, then you got to work on that one too. And of course, we all start off with that. And so then, okay, so how do we balance all this, right? And one of the things that has happened in modern culture, unfortunately, is that we have this, our sense of self is has what we call a reverse pride. Okay, so pride is thinking we're better than everybody else, right? Reverse pride is this sense that we are worse than everybody else. Okay, So we're not even on an equal, you know, I make mistakes, everybody else makes mistakes, I do really well sometimes, everybody else does really well sometimes, sort of this balance, that there are some people who are better than me in certain areas, and some people who are not as good as me in certain areas. And there are some people, you know, like this whole thing that somehow I am, you know, within this middle place with all the other beings. I'm not better than everybody else, but I'm not worse than everybody else. What often happens is that we have this sense of self-importance, that I'm better than everybody else. We have these really high expectations for ourselves, you know, this sense of perfectionism. And then when we make the slightest mistake, or we don't reach our expectations, then we immediately go to the other spectrum. We go and think we're the worst of everybody. We're such a failure and we can't do anything, and, you know, we don't deserve anything, and, you know, like this whole opposite thing. So we're either like really overblown or we're really underblown. And when we start to get this sense of the self existing not as a concrete, separate, independent thing, then that competition starts to go away. That jealousy starts to go away. And that sense of a self is somehow being more than everybody else or less than everybody else doesn't make any sense, because we have this interdependence. So this is a pretty tough concept, but it's very important how we relate to ourselves, of course, because then that starts to determine how we relate to others. So when we have this, if we have, and many of us do in modern society, because of advertising, because of maybe some modern parenting techniques, we tend to have um, a, a sense of self that is somehow not not as important as everybody else. That we are unlovable, we're not worthy, we are, you know, because we have made mistakes in our past, then we are bad people. So we do this cognitive fusion where we have made mistakes, you know, like maybe we've hurt someone really badly in our lives through a mistake, or maybe we've really hurt ourselves in some ways. You know, we haven't particularly had good habits in, you know, with you know, whatever, intoxicants, money, whatever it can be, sex. I mean, there's so many ways in which we harm our food, right? In which we can harm ourselves. So maybe we've had some of those problems. And then we think because we've had those problems, we put that together with this sense of self, and we make our identity about those mistakes. Instead of being, our identity is so much more than that, right? We've made mistakes, but we've also done really good things. And then we talk about this Buddha potential, the fact that because our minds, because those mistakes and those negative emotions that motivated those mistakes are not in the nature of our minds, they are not um, fused with our minds, we can get rid of them. And actually our minds are pure and clear. And so that's why we have this ability to become Buddhas, to free ourselves of all those afflictive emotions, to purify all of our past mistakes, you know, to forgive ourselves. So so this sense of who we are gets, it gets crunched into our mistakes, and we get these mental habits of self-judgment, of putting ourselves down. So this is also a sense of an overinflated, exaggerated sense of self that feels like I am worse than everybody else, that I don't deserve to live, and you know, that therefore. And then it's sometimes in bodhicitta that gets reinforced, because we think, okay, in order to be a good person, I have to serve others, okay, and I don't deserve to be taken care of. So then we focus all on others, and we think that that's going to somehow heal us and somehow, you know, get us, you know, make us feel good about ourselves, when in actuality, in order to relate to others in a healthy way, we have to have a healthy sense of self. We have to love ourselves first, without doing this you know, this concretizing of this identity. So you can see it's really, we have to unpack it very carefully. So the place you know, with this selflessness, we'll do some of that, right? Now, I also want to talk a bit about self-compassion, because I think for when we're learning about compassion, we and in order to start to release this concrete sense of self that thinks that it is a bad person, that thinks that it is somehow not worthy of love, we also have to have some compassion for ourselves in order to release that, in order to start to see even the possibility that we are interdependent with others. Because if we're so stuck in this view of ourselves, then there's no room for opening, for interrelatedness. Okay, so let's take a look at, I have a couple quotes here. Okay, remember, you have been criticizing yourself for years and years and it hasn't worked. Try approving of yourself and see what happens. So this is Louise Hay. She is a psychologist in this area of self-esteem, I believe. And then Jack Kornfield is a Buddhist within the insight tradition, longtime meditator. When we struggle to change ourselves, we in fact only continue the patterns of self-judgment and aggression. We keep the war against ourselves alive. So once again, we're talking about this balance of self-acceptance, you know, recognizing that we are who we are is the result of causes and conditions, and then aspiring to change, you know, wanting to be better is fine, but not in a way that we, you know, that takes us into judgment, right? Takes us into, you're not okay and therefore you have to change. More of an acceptance, and then an encouragement to grow, more of an aspiration to become who we can become. Because no one ever stays the same. It's impossible, right? Everything, all of us are constantly changing. We are impermanent. So encouraging, you know, seeing where we are and encouraging us to become better is different from saying you're not okay the way you are, okay? But again, it's a balance. It's a very interesting balance of how to do this, how to be self-accepting and at the same time motivate change and encourage change in a positive direction. Okay, so let's look at some aspects of self-compassion. We have self-kindness versus self-judgment. So how do we talk to ourselves? How do we, what words do we say when we're talking to ourselves? Do we have old recordings of, oh, you're such an idiot, or you're so stupid, or you're so ugly, or, you know, any kind of like, sometimes we create habits of thinking that, and these aren't necessarily in our awareness all the time either. Um, they have to be through meditation and watching our minds, and you know, this mindfulness of our thoughts, we can become more aware of where we use harsh language. And it's interesting, when we are most vulnerable, when we have like made a mistake, or when we're sick, or when we're tired, you know, or when we, you know, we're in a really difficult situation like now, then we can tend to be more self-judgmental, you know, blame ourselves, because of course we're the center of the universe and we're independent from everything else. And so it becomes very difficult to then be kind to ourselves, to see, oh, there are a lot of things, especially right now, that are out of our control. You know, that we are helpless in so many ways right now. You know, the government is saying how we have to behave, and, you know, and we're all scared of disease, and, you know, it's very hard to start to open up and admit that we don't have control, because we don't exist that way. The only way we could absolutely have control over our whole lives was if there was a self that existed that was independent of everything. And that's impossible. It just doesn't exist. So learning to be kind to ourselves, you know, recognizing that there are conditions that are out of our control, and we're doing the best we can to cope with them, to deal with them. And then common humanity versus isolation is when we talk about how everyone has made mistakes, okay? Everyone has had problems, right? Everyone has, you know, been depressed in their lives. Everyone has had problems with addiction, whether it's food or alcohol or sex or, you know, spending or, you know, whatever it may be. Everyone has struggled with this. Everyone has failed in some way, you know. You know, it's rare that someone has gone through life and not been rejected in a relationship. And yet when we go through these experiences, we think we're the only ones, and therefore we're worse than the rest of humanity, instead of seeing many people are going through this, and having more of an open, like, when we're suffering, to see our suffering as similar, you know, to others, that other people are also suffering. And then our compassion grows, our compassion for ourselves, our compassion for others. And then the last one, mindfulness versus over-identification, has to do with this sense that when we have strong emotions, we tend to again do this cognitive fusion thing. I am my anger. I am my depression. I am my, you know, my failure. I am my, you know, whatever it may be, whatever strong emotion. I am my anxiety. I am my fear. And we just get, so absorbed in those emotions that we can't get any kind of distance. And Mingyur Rinpoche calls this vertical distance. This sense that when we do meditation, when we sit and observe our emotions, we start to get some space between the observer that is calm, and that is actually the aspect of the mind that does not have those emotions inherently and absolutely, that part of the mind that is always still, that is always peaceful, that we aren't necessarily always aware of, because we do this again. We say, because I'm feeling anxiety, therefore I am an anxious person. So when we sit in meditation, we see my anxiety is over here, and my calm, perceiving, observing, still mind is over here. And this is what the experience of mindfulness of emotions gives us, this gap, you know, this space between, where then we are not over-identified with it. We have more of a mindfulness, and then it can release. It's easier for it to go, for it to be, you know, not so intense. Okay, so let's do some breakout groups. So we're going to divide you into, let's say, 25 groups. Okay, Felipe?
Sure.
So that there are at least 3 people in most of them. Okay. How do we balance self-compassion with acts of serving others? So if you can discuss, how do we take care of ourselves at the same time that we are benefiting others?
Okay. So 10 minutes, yeah?
Yep.
I'm starting them now. Mute everyone.
Hello?
Oh, hello. Hi.
Hi. Uh-huh. How are you?
Good. Okay.
Good.
Okay.
Just okay?
Are you doing good?
Yeah, I'm a little tired today, but I'm good. When I start teaching, I get hello. I
Hi.
get more energy. Anita, where are you?
I'm here.
You're in India. Okay. Good. Good.
Yeah, I'm in India.
So yeah, again, when I join these breakout groups, I don't want to be the one talking so much because I think I talk the whole time. So you guys have an opportunity to talk. So how do you balance taking care of yourself, the self-compassion, with acts of serving others?
Well, can I start?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel that if we do have something, then we can give something to other people. So if we love for ourselves, we have self-compassion, then we can have compassion for others. So that is why I think that self-compassion is really needed. If we uh, would like to give compassion, we would like to have compassion for others. So yeah, that is what I think.
Mm. And you were showing us your t-shirt?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, she was showing us her t-shirt.
But that has to do with helping each other.
Oh, yes, the rabbit, the monkey, and the elephant. And the bird.
Elephant, monkey, rabbit, and the bird. We all have something to share and help to reach whatever we're supposed to reach. That's from Baksu.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a common theme in Buddhism, like a symbol for friendship, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody has something, and we all can help each other. The strong to the more weak ones.
So maybe it's
we're
like
weak in some way, and we are strong in other ways. So we can help all the time, and also be part of the diversity. That go with Buddhism?
Oh, definitely. Definitely, I think. Yeah. Yeah. And so much about you know, ourselves as interdependent beings,
At the
because
start of some,
yeah.
today I was reading something about international trade and countries that are exporting, they export things that they have more of. It's easier for them to make, or they just plentiful in agriculture. And then they import the things that are costly for them to do. So maybe if you think about that and how that fits with like a person, then if, for example, I am good at I don't know, cooking a lot of food all the time, and then but I'm bad at, maybe I'm being angry all the time, then maybe someone else can benefit with my food, but I need to seek out someone that can help me with what I'm lacking in, like anger or something else like that. I don't know if that's relevant, but
Yeah, I think it makes sense. What do you think, Anita?
I don't know.
Do you ever have a sense that you're not good enough, that somehow you have, that what you have to give isn't enough?
Yeah, I do.
Hmm.
Well, most of the in my childhood, I was really very angry. That is why I think I'm most attracted to Buddhism. That gives me, I mean, it makes me very peaceful when I do meditation and all. That is why I think I'm really very attracted to this philosophy, because in India, that we all are like mostly I'm a Hindu. So yeah, it is kind of awkward for me that like I'm all the time that in my mind that everything is like it's totally different things, like totally opposite. Because in Buddhism, we don't trust God. We don't believe in like there is any creator. But in Hindu, yeah, you know that right? We do believe in gods and yeah. So it was kind of like constantly I'm fighting with my inner self, like mostly. But yeah, I'm following this philosophy because it gives me peaceful and it makes me like I can do anything. I mean, it makes my day like starting. So yeah, I think it makes me. But yeah, I do feel that because if you, I feel like sometimes I'm like angry at people without any reason because I only have that in my childhood. I only have that in within me. So yeah, what you have, you can give that to people, right? So yeah, I do feel that if you want to have self compassion for others, then yeah, you must have it for yourself though. So you have to be like self compassionate first. Am I wrong?
No, see that? No, there's no right or wrong. There is no right or wrong.
Anita,
Yeah.
I have the same kind of conflict of the mind because I'm not a Buddhist person, but I've been involved with Buddhism for many years, because it was a Lama that came to this country from Baksu, no, from Dharamsala. And then I was helping him to settle here because he wanted to be here for some reason. And so I was exposed to many lamas and teaching, but I always told them, but I'm not Buddhist, I'm Catholic, and we believe in God. But Buddhism doesn't go like against with whatever in Hindu. Doesn't go against. It's like it made me understand more about life and with different names, but it's the same kind of.
Yeah.
We all are part of one, like the body, just different organs. That's what I think.
I like that. I like that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
All a part of the body, but different organs. Yeah, and the Dalai Lama says we need different religions in order to, because of different people's minds. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like, go ahead. What?
Drolma, there is a query of mine. If we take any vows and intentionally or unintentionally, if we break that, then what should we do?
Purify. So,
Purify.
purify. Regret, choose not to do it again, that sort of thing.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to meet you and see you again.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get started again. So now I want to transition into bodhicitta. So again, it's like having this having a sense of self-worth, because they say bodhisattvas who have bodhicitta, that they are actually have very strong self-confidence, that they have to, that you have to be strong enough in who you are to do the tough things that sometimes compassion takes. And I think of all the EMTs and the paramedics and the doctors and the nurses and, you know, all the healthcare professionals who are going in there day after day to work with all the, you know, this illness that's spreading all over the world. And they know that they could get sick, you know, that no matter how much they protect themselves, because they're dealing with this disease over and over, that they could get sick. So they have to have a real strong sense of, I can take care of myself, I can be effective, even in the face of this fear. And I think that takes a sense of self that is powerful, but at the same time recognizes interdependence. So how we balance that is really challenging, but I feel like bodhicitta gives us that opportunity to figure out how to do that. So let's review from the last class when we talked about bodhicitta, these aspects of it, because bodhicitta isn't just one thing, okay? It's like, it's a whole attitude, and it's an aspiration most of all. It's a wish. So it comes from a warm heart, from having a warm heart. And it is a wish for others to have ultimate satisfaction. So not only for ourselves and others, of course, we're included in others, because everybody, okay? When we're focusing on this aspect of self that is interdependent, then the boundary between self and others starts to dissolve. So the wish for others to have ultimate satisfaction, the recognition that all beings have a potential for wholeness, that all beings have this ability to become Buddhas, to become better than what they are, that everyone has that potential and no one is stuck, you know. And so when people believe that their situation is hopeless, that they can't get out of it, that, you know, that they're going to be this way for the rest of their lives, you know, or even starting to think that killing themselves is the best way to deal with their situation, that this sense of hopelessness, it's just from a Buddhist perspective is not logical, okay? And in the sense that it doesn't reflect the way things really are. The way things really are is that we are changing, and we can free ourselves of the difficult emotions. We can free ourselves of the problems, and we can become strong. Everyone has that potential, and no one is subject to not having that potential. There is no situation in which anyone is so overwhelmed. They may feel like they're overwhelmed by such negativities that they can't get out. But the fact is if they remember, those negativities are not inherently part of who they are. And who they are is actually free of all those negativities. Then you can just sitting there and saying, you know, this is who I am. This is who I really am. This is who I really am. You know, I am really basic goodness. I am really, you know, love and compassion. This is who I really am. Just remembering that can be huge in breaking up this idea of I'm horrible, I'm, you know, and this whole self-destructive thing we can get into. And then this commitment, so bodhicitta is about this commitment to develop ourselves for others. So, so I want to talk about one way in which we start to develop this connection to others, okay, and getting out of this self-centeredness, whether it is thinking we're the worst of everybody or we're the best of everybody, is this thing called the 7-point cause and effect. So the first step in the 7-point cause and effect is considered to be one of the most difficult realizations that that anyone can have, you know, the most difficult to develop. So and it's based on, again, it's based on logic. So seeing all beings as having been one's mother. So if we consider all the, when we talked about reincarnation last week, and we were talking about the fact that our minds are beginningless and endless, it means that in our past lives, and again, we're talking infinity, so we're talking forever. So that means that in all this forever, and Venerable Exo said this yesterday, in all this forever, we have been everything. Okay, we've been in all the realms. We've been humans countless times. We've been animals countless times, which means that every time we were born from a womb, we had a mother. Okay, so we had a relationship with every single being that exists, because we're talking infinity. Okay, we're talking infinite sentient beings. We're talking infinite possibilities of having been someone's child. So seeing all beings as having been our mother, and they say that the only reason that we can't recognize, our mothers, like today, right now, I can recognize my mother, right? I know what she looks like because I had a relationship with her. Or, it could be a caretaker. It doesn't have to be your mother, your biological mother. It doesn't have to be. It could be anyone who nurtured you and cared for you when you were a child. It could be your father too. Everyone's, all beings have been our fathers too. Okay, so depending on what relationship is most powerful for you. So I can recognize my mother of this life, and the only reason I don't recognize Felipe as having been my mother is because Felipe's in a different body, right? And I don't remember when Felipe was my mother, but he was at some point, definitely. Okay, based on this logic. Okay, you can see how it starts to get hard, right? When we start thinking of all the people in our lives, President Trump has been my mother, right? Very hard to think of, but he's someone's father now. Why wouldn't he have been my mother? And then my relationship to my mother of this life, or to my main caretaker of this life, is one of remembering their kindness. So in order for me to have, to exist now, someone had to, hold me when I was crying and sick, protect me from the elements, protect me from sickness, clean my bottom, clean my puke, change my clothes many times. My mother and father, my caretakers, had to sacrifice a lot in order to, for me to have a good education, for me to have the medicine that I needed, the insurance, for us to have a house to live in, so remembering the kindness of those people who nurtured us, who helped us become who we are today. Because if they didn't do all those things, I wouldn't be here. And so I actually owe them a lot. And then the third step is wishing to repay that kindness. I wished, so I have taken, wishing to repay that kindness. So wanting to take care of them. And we see this, of course, as we get older and our parents start to age. If we have that opportunity, we have the opportunity to repay their kindness, to take care of them, to make sure they're taken care of as they age, and when they're sick, and making sure they're okay. Sometimes we don't have that opportunity. But if we're going to expand this, and we're going to start to see that every being that exists, all the insects and animals, all the 8 billion people on the earth, all these beings have been our mothers, then our sense of caring for them, our sense of holding them dear, our sense of a warm heart starts to expand to more beings than just our immediate circle. Okay, which doesn't mean that I can go out there and actually do something directly for every one of those beings, because of course I can't, right? But in my heart, I can start to open, I can start to include all beings has been my mother. And remembering how kind they were to me, just remembering how the mother of this life was so kind. Then I can also remember the kindness of every other mother. Okay, so all mother sentient beings, you may have heard this, all my mother sentient beings. And then wishing to care for them, having compassion for them when they suffer, wishing their compassion to be taken away. Okay, and then we'll do these last steps quickly because we want to get some questions in before we do meditation. Yeah, no, we're okay. We can go through this. We can take a few more minutes to do this, and then we'll do 10 minutes of questions. Okay, so as a result of holding all these beings as, you know, remembering them as having been our mothers and holding them dear, then we develop something called great love. So great love is loving all beings. And then great compassion is then when we hold someone dear, we don't want them to suffer. So we have this compassion for them. And remember, compassion is both empathy and wishing to free them. It's not just getting overwhelmed by the suffering, because we could really do that, especially right now when we think of all the people who are dying, you know, in the hospitals right now. Many people are dying, and it's very difficult. Like Lexok was talking about the doctors in New York who are seeing a lot more people who are dying, who are passing away, and how, you know, how do we have compassion for them and not get overwhelmed, not get buried in the suffering. And the way we do that is that we have this hopefulness. We have this sense that their suffering is not going to last forever, and they can be free from it, right? They have the opportunity to be free from it. So then the supreme thought of taking responsibility becomes, not only do I wish to remove your suffering, but I am going to do everything in my power throughout my whole life to develop myself, to become the best person I can be, so that I can affect the rest of the world in any way that I can. So that's the supreme thought of taking responsibility. And they often talk about this like the love that a mother has for her only child and what she would do for her only child. But the other one is if you imagine that there is a child in a pond, you know, like, or in a lake, who is drowning, okay? And there are all these people standing on the shore, and you have all of them have these huge compassion for the child who is drowning, and they want the child to, you know, to be rescued, right? To be free of the fear of death and free of the pain of drowning. And it's only those beings who feel they have the capacity, who feel they have the capability, who also are willing to take on the responsibility to jump into the lake, who can swim too, right? And save the child. Okay, so this is the supreme thought of taking responsibility. So it becomes, and it's, again, it's a mental attitude. It becomes an action when we can, but first we have to have this mental attitude. The supreme thought of taking responsibility. I am going to be the one who is going to learn how to swim, who is going to jump in the lake and save that child, or all our mothers, right? So then bodhicitta, this wish to become the very best being that we can be, again, through nurturing ourselves, right? With self-compassion, because that's the only way we're going to become, with an acceptance that this is where we are and this is who we can become, right? With this balance, then we develop this aspiration, and we're more willing to practice. We're more willing to develop this warm and open heart. And even when people are very difficult, you know, when we see injustice in the world, when we get angry and we get irritated, we're like, no, you know, my heart is one of that is warm and loving, and that's where I want to be, and that's where I'm going to. I may not be there yet, but I know I have this potential. I know I can become this, and I want to become this in order to benefit others. So it's not a pressure to, you know, change and, you know, become something we're not. It's more like a flower. This is very humanistic point of view from humanistic psychology. It's more like a flower plant. You know, a flowering plant has the ability to bloom, right? But it's only with, it's not with like pounding it. You can't pound a seed and say bloom, right? That's not how flowers bloom. And we're the same way. It's through nurturing, through, you know, creating, you know, comfortable soil, warmth and light and water, and maybe some encouraging words, you know, like, come on, grow, right? But you can't just say grow, 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 because they say, like plants, if you're mad at them, they don't flourish, right? So yeah, okay, so that's enough of that. So we're gonna let's do some question and answer maybe for 10 minutes, and then we'll do a meditation on the 7-point cause and effect.
Okay, so I'm going to start by unmuting Rajveer. So you can
Morning, Venerable Drolma.
Hello.
Hi. The concept of no self is a very powerful one. I wanted to ask you, how do we reconcile this concept with negative experiences that we have had in the past? We may have been hurt by others, we may have hurt others. So how do we tell ourselves today, after learning about this concept, that it may have been just the body and the mind, and the self at that time wasn't as concrete as we made it out to be? So how do we use
Right.
the learning of this concept for our negative experiences in the past?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So one way is that we can look at all the causes and conditions that went into that situation. So there were, you know, there was the fact of the, you know, that we were children, maybe not, depending on, we weren't necessarily as mature as we are now. So that's one factor that was in there. We also have the whole, you know, situation of past karmic seeds that we planted, okay, which was not necessarily us in this life, right? It was likely an us in a past life who planted those seeds. So if so then how can we blame a self of today for something that was all the coming together of all these causes and conditions for that experience to have happened? We can't really do that. You know, we can't say I am to blame for all these things that came together, right? Now, if we're repeatedly experiencing the same thing again and again in our lives, if we're, you know, repeatedly get in the situation, then maybe we need to respond in a different way now. But blaming ourselves doesn't allow us to respond either in a positive way. If we blame ourselves and make ourselves responsible for all of it, right, take it all on, then there's no room for us to change and grow and become, and, you know, have, you know, create different causes for the future. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Okay, now moving on to Salo. You can ask a question.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, Venerable. I would like to know more about the relationship between ignorance and karma. You know, the first two links of dependent origination. The second one is kind of karma, right?
Right.
For what I understood.
Yes.
And I don't understand the link between those two. Like, I thought karma was a natural law, you know, that it was
Yeah.
independent of whether if you were ignorant or not.
It is. However, when we talk about intentional karma, we're talking about what is in our minds at the moment that we do an act that has an effect. So we're talking about, so we can talk about karma in terms of cause and effect, right? And in general, cause and effect works on a physical level as well as a non-physical level. Now, when we're talking about the 12 links of dependent origination, we're saying that this law of cause and effect, how it works in our minds to plant the seeds for us to be born again in the future. And the link between those two is that when we have ignorance, in particular this ignorance that sees the self as concrete, that cause us to have intentional karma that is negative, that creates the seeds for us to be born in karma, be born in samsara again and again. So we're talking within the 12 links about a specific instance of the overall law of karma.
Okay.
One where ignorance is involved and intention is involved. And because ignorance is involved, then our intentions are never pure.
Okay, so karma can exist without ignorance.
Yes. Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, an enlightened being also has karma, right?
Well, they're different. They don't have the same kind of intentional karma that we do, because their acts are all spontaneously benefiting. But they are subject to cause and effect, you know, within this relative conventional world, in the sense that the actions that they do have an effect, right? But the intentional karma in their minds, they don't have that, because they spontaneously, automatically, without intention, just give, right? Wherever the causes are created for them to be able to benefit. So they know they're actually free of the kind of karma that we have, that one based on ignorance.
But I mean, they still create karma, but it's all positive. Could we say that? Or they just don't create it?
They create effects, but they don't carry any seeds in their mind stream.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Very
Little,
clear.
yeah.
Yes.
Good. I'm glad.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, another one? And then
Yeah,
we'll go to
we'll move
meditation.
on to Fernando. You can now ask your question.
Hello. Yeah, my question is in relation to equanimity. How important is to develop equanimity? How important is equanimity to develop bodhicitta, and how to develop it?
So we're going to do that tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll do equanimity tomorrow. Yeah, we'll spend a good, 10, 15 minutes on it. So good question. Yes, good question. Okay, so let's do some meditation.
Okay, so please everyone go back to a comfortable position and bring your posture again to a comfortable state. Start by taking a few minutes to settle down. Allow body and mind to go back to a state of calmness and relaxation, getting rid of any signs of tension, getting rid of any worries and concerns in the mind. Using this opportunity to relax more and more in the body. Taking a few deep breaths to allow the body to go back to its natural state, a state of balance, stillness, alertness. Now gently letting go, observing the body, bringing the attention to the space of the mind. We first start with the thought that all sentient beings want to be happy and free of suffering. We extend that thought to everyone. And on that basis, we can go into the first point, the 7-point meditation for developing bodhicitta. So understanding that all sentient beings have been our mother, allow your mind to move around, and whoever comes to your mind, whether an individual or a group of people, take a moment to understand that each one of them has been your mother. Every single one of these people have been my mother, not once, but countless times. And then moving on to the second point, recognizing their kindness. You can now imagine very clearly your mother or caregiver of this life. And acknowledging how this person cared for you. Your mother carried you in the body for 9 months, gave birth to us. And whoever was your caregiver or your mother had to endure so much hardship. But they did it happily just to give us life. Protecting us from the cold, helping us when we couldn't move or walk, feeding us, nurturing us with love and affection, cleaned us, making sure we were dressed, washed, teaching us how to become a part of society, teaching us how to talk, how to understand things. Take a moment to recall the presence of this person, from whom we've received so much care, so much attention, so much love. And now extend this feeling to all beings, understanding that they've all been our mother countless times. They've all provided us with measureless happiness, protected us from harm. Without them, we couldn't have survived. Each one of them have been our mothers infinite times. And now going to the third point, wishing to repay their kindness. You can give rise to the thought, wow, all of these beings have been so kind to me. Now that we see everything we have is because of others, we can generate a strong sense of gratitude, knowing that they've all been so kind to us. Automatically, we want to return that love back. So develop a strong wish to repay all of the kindness of all sentient beings for everything they've done for us. And just let your mind rest in the feeling of wishing to repay their kindness. And this gives rise to great love. From this sense of gratitude, allow a sense of closeness, of pure love to arise. Seeing all sentient beings as endearing, close and dear, allow your heart to open up to them, to embrace all of them. Perceiving all beings in a beautiful, glowing way, just like a mother would view their child. Just arise the thought, how wonderful would it be if they all find the happiness and the causes for happiness. And generating great compassion. Try to give rise to the caring attitude that wants all sentient beings to be free from suffering. Seeing how they're stuck in the darkness of ignorance, swept away in the oceans of samsara. Give rise to the wish for each and every sentient being who have been our mothers to be free from their suffering. Open up your heart and view all sentient beings in the same way a mother would feel when she sees her only child in pain, wishing to remove that suffering immediately. And then giving rise to the special altruistic attitude, the special resolve, thinking, I don't just want them to have pleasure, I want them to have lasting happiness, genuine happiness. And if I want them to be happy, then I myself really need to look after them. Imagine you're in a position of saving someone from falling off a cliff. In this way, you generate a deep sense of responsibility to save that person. And you can extend that same feeling to all sentient beings. Thinking, no matter what it takes, I myself will liberate all sentient beings from samsara by myself alone. And giving rise to the supreme mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. Having developed the special attitude, the altruistic intention, wanting to free all sentient beings by ourselves, ask yourself, at the moment, am I really capable of achieving this goal and eliminating the suffering of sentient beings, bringing them to lasting happiness? At this moment, am I able to bring even one sentient being to that state? How can I possibly do that? How can I make it come true? We then come to the understanding that we will only be able to free all sentient beings from suffering and lead them to Buddhahood if first we ourselves become enlightened. Therefore, make a strong determination. No matter what, I will obtain the peerless and perfect state of enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Gently coming out of the meditation, we move on to the dedication. May all beings everywhere, plagued by the sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored and find repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be free from their ailments. Whatever diseases are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Please come back tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll do some more bodhicitta and equanimity.
Thank you.
Thank you.